You think you can walk around clean, boy? Not today. Captain Trent Lawson said it the moment Officer Elias Crow lifted the spare tire and exposed the two tightly wrapped bricks of heroin. In that instant, under the sharp sun, the future of Lawson's celebrated career cracked in half. He grabbed Darius Hale by the shirt and drove him into the side of the Jeep with a violent thrust. The metal struck Darius's shoulder with a sickening jolt that sent pain radiating through his ribs. Humiliation washed over him as children on the sidewalk fell silent. The force, the tone, the slur, and the false discovery of the heroin would become the first nail in the coffin of one of the most corrupt and decorated captains in Detroit. Before we go deeper into this story, tell me where you are watching from. And if stories like this matter to you, please subscribe to the channel and give me a like. It helps more people hear these voices, and it keeps this work moving forward. The sun rested heavily on Grayset Avenue that afternoon, its brightness cutting across the hood of Darius's old Jeep, as if marking the exact moment everything would finally shift. He had parked with care minutes earlier, his mind focused on legal briefs stacked beside a half-finished coffee. The air inside the Jeep was warm with the faint smell of paper and ink, a familiar comfort to him in the long days of public defense work. When his encrypted phone vibrated against the dashboard, he looked down and saw the message he had been waiting for over 4 long years. It happens in the next 72 hours. The words carried weight, not panic, not fear, just a final confirmation that the trap he had built with quiet patience was about to close. He lifted his head again, and there they were, blue lights blooming behind him. Lawson had chosen the perfect moment. Daylight, a busy street, witnesses who would see everything yet understand nothing. Darius kept his hands on the wheel as the door opened. Lawson leaned in, his mirrored sunglasses shining in the bright sun. "Step out," he said, as if commanding a recruit. Darius complied with calm control. When he stood on the pavement, he spoke clearly. "I do not consent to a search." Lawson ignored the statement. Crow strode to the rear of the Jeep with the confidence of a man who had planted evidence more times than he could count. Darius watched the trunk open. He watched the spare tire lift. He watched the 2 kilos slide beneath it. He knew this moment well. He had imagined it in detail. He had prepared for it from the second he left the badge behind. At 27, Lawson stepped directly in front of him. "You are under arrest, counselor," he said, placing the word counselor on his tongue like an insult. He pulled Darius's hands behind him and locked the cuffs until the metal cut into his wrists. Pain shot through Darius's arms. He remained steady. Lawson mistook that steadiness for fear. Darius spoke quietly. "You know this will not end the way you believe." Lawson let out a dark laugh. "It ends exactly how I choose." Darius did not answer. He did not need to, because this moment, this street, this sunlight was part of a plan Lawson did not see coming. Inside Darius's old Jeep rested a micro SD card that held 3 years of GPS data from a tracker he had planted on Lawson's take-home Tahoe. Across the city, in a dim apartment smelling faintly of solder and cables, Theo Rivera watched everything through a live drone feed that followed Crow's movements from above. At the Detroit Free Press building, Camilla Hale waited for Darius's signal. She kept her hand near her phone, ready for the message that would ignite a storm she had been preparing for ever since she found their father's old files on the Midwest Imports Shell Company. And miles away, retired Detective Kai Brooks, a grieving father whose son had died from heroin recycled through Lawson's network, sat with a concealed wire under his collar, ready for the shipment Lawson planned that weekend. Yet Lawson believed he still controlled the day. As he pushed Darius toward the back seat of the cruiser, he leaned close and whispered, "You should have stayed small." Darius met the reflection of sunlight off the window. "I was never small." Lawson shoved him harder, forcing him into the hot interior of the cruiser. The door shut with a sharp metallic finality. Darius felt the heat on his face, felt the cuffs pressing against tender skin, felt the ache in his shoulder where the metal of the Jeep had struck. He closed his eyes for a brief second and breathed with quiet purpose. This was the moment he had trained himself to survive. This was the moment that would bring everything to the surface. Lawson walked back to Crow, his posture relaxed, almost satisfied. He had done this before, to others, to many. Darius thought of the men who sat in cells built on lies. He thought of their faces. He thought of his father, Detective Marcus Hale, who had tried to expose the network years earlier and paid for it with his life. He remembered the whisper of truth his father left behind in old notes and hidden files. Those files had led to today. Darius opened his eyes again. He studied Lawson through the glass. He did not look away. The cruiser began to move. Sunlight poured across the dashboard. The heat rose. Lawson glanced at Darius through the mirror. "You will not walk away from this," he said. Darius held the captain's gaze, his voice calm and steady. "Neither will you." Lawson did not respond. He kept driving, unaware of what waited for him. He did not know that the wire on Kai Brooks would record his final major transaction. He did not know that the drone above Grasset Avenue had captured every second of the heroin drop. He did not know that Camila already held enough evidence to shatter the narrative he had built over decades. And he did not know that federal agents were preparing to act the moment the last piece fell into place. The day the sun hit the hood of that Jeep was the day the truth finally rose, and it would not be quiet again. Wayne County Jail received Darius Hale with the same cold efficiency it used for every man who entered its gates. And the moment he stepped through the intake door, the fluorescent lights glared down with a harsh clarity that exposed bruises, fatigue, and the deep ache settling into his shoulder from the violent arrest. Officers spoke little as they pushed him through the line. One fingerprint card after another, metal cuffs replaced by tighter ones, and a plastic wristband snapped around his arm. The sound echoed in the concrete room. He kept his expression calm. He knew the process. He once guided others through it. Now he walked it alone. When the steel door slid open and the first officer barked, "Division 9?" Darius stepped forward with the slow, careful pace of a man who understood exactly what waited in that unit. It was the place they sent those they wanted forgotten. The place built for men serving long sentences. Men framed by officers like Lawson. Men who understood loyalty through force. As the noise of voices thickened, a familiar figure rose from one of the benches. Jamal Cruz lifted his head. His eyes widened with shock, then with recognition that reached through 3 years of suffering. "Darius," he said quietly, as if saying the name aloud might draw unwanted attention. Darius stepped closer. "It is good to see you," he said, though both knew this was the worst place for such a meeting. Jamal had been a respected high school teacher before Lawson's network buried him under a false charge of drug possession. He carried the weight of that injustice in the slow, deliberate way he moved. He studied Darius's bruised face. "They came for you too," he said. Darius nodded once. "Yes, and they believe they have finished it." Jamal's voice lowered. "You know how they treat new arrivals." Darius did not respond. He did not need to. The truth revealed itself an hour later in the shower block that night. The heat of the water mixed with the cold stares of 3 men who stepped in with calculated purpose. Their silence said more than words. Their movements were practiced, steady, and paid for. Commissary promises, favors traded through vents and lunch trays. Darius felt the first kick drive into his ribs, sharp and deliberate. Another struck his lower back with a force that made his chest tighten. A fist caught his jaw. His head snapped sideways. Water fell over him in blurred streaks. He tasted blood. Two teeth hit the wet tile with a soft rattle. A boot came down again, this time on his shoulder, landing directly on the bruise from the arrest. Pain shot through him with brutal clarity. He struggled to brace himself, but the weight of 3 bodies made resistance impossible. Another blow struck his spine. His breath choked. He saw the tile, the drain, the water swirling pink, and in that moment, a memory cut through the pain with a sharp emotional force. He saw a 17-year-old boy lying on a cold city sidewalk more than a decade earlier, unarmed. Still, shot during a raid, Lawson covered up with the same confidence he had shown today. Darius had watched that case disappear from the record. He had watched Lawson celebrate a promotion after it. That memory, stark and painful, kept him conscious as the blows continued. When the officers finally dragged the attackers away, pretending to have arrived just in time, Darius lay on the tile with pain radiating through his ribs and jaw. A single officer looked down at him and said, "You should have stayed quiet." Darius closed his eyes and breathed through the agony. He refused to break. The next afternoon, the visitation room door opened slowly, and Camila walked in with the steady posture of someone who refused to show fear even as her heart raced beneath her blouse. The glass between them reflected a faint outline of bruises across Darius's face. She lifted the phone with shaking hands. "Tell me what they did," she said. Darius leaned forward, his cheek pressing lightly against the cold surface. "We do not have time for that," he answered. "Listen. You must get Dad's watch before they inventory it. They will destroy it if they find the card inside." Camilla held his gaze. Her voice carried both pain and determination. "I will get it," she said. "And I will not let this city bury you." Darius nodded. "You must move quickly. They are preparing for something. I can feel it." Camilla pressed her hand against the glass, steadying herself as she studied the deep purple bruise around his collarbone. "Does Lawson know you planned this?" she asked. Darius shook his head. "He believes he controls everything. That belief will blind him." Camilla breathed slowly. "I will go to the cabin tonight. I will bring the files, the footage, and Theo's work." "We will not stop," Darius answered softly. "Be careful. Lawson watches everyone." Camilla's voice gained strength. "Then let him watch, and let him fall." As the guard signaled the end of visitation, Darius lowered the phone and rested his forehead momentarily against the glass. Pain throbbed in every bone. His ribs felt raw. Each breath reminded him of the boots, the fists, the weight of men paid to silence him. Still, beneath the pain, a quiet resolve remained steady. The truth had begun its rise the moment the cuffs closed around his wrists. Now it moved through the city in small, deliberate steps. Camilla would reach the cabin before sundown. Theo would store the backup data in 3 separate locations. Isabella Quinn would review the financial threads Lawson never imagined anyone would find. And Kai Brooks would prepare to wear the wire that would end the entire network. When guards escorted Darius back to Division 9, Jamal stood near the bars and watched him walk with slow, careful steps. "You are hurt," Jamal said quietly. Darius nodded. "I am." Jamal lowered his voice further. "2 men died in here after nights like yours. You must be ready. They will try again." Darius paused. "Then we must work faster." Jamal studied him for a long moment. "This place breaks many men. Do not let it break you," Darius answered with calm strength. "I will not. There is too much at stake." Jamal stepped back as the guard opened the cell door. "Then hold on," he said, "because the truth is coming." And as the door closed with a hard metallic strike, Darius lowered himself onto the thin mattress with care, pain tightening across his ribs. Yet through every ache, every bruise, every breath, he held one clear thought. Daylight had caught Lawson once, and it would catch him again. The walls of Division 9 could bruise him, but they could not stop the rising truth moving steadily through the city beyond them. Camilla Hale left the jail with a steady stride, though her heart carried the weight of every bruise on her brother's face, and by the time she reached her car, her hands trembled with a quiet fury she refused to show inside those walls. She started the engine and drove with measured control, hearing Darius's voice repeat in her mind, "Get Dad's watch before they inventory it." She understood the urgency. She also understood that Lawson watched every move she made. The drive north toward the old family cabin felt longer than it ever had, even though the winter sun still held firm in the sky. She did not allow herself to think about fear. She focused only on the mission Darius had trusted her to complete. The cabin waited in the woods beyond Brighton, a place untouched since their father's death, a place that carried the last fragments of his unfinished investigation. When Camilla pushed open the door, dust lifted in the air, settling slowly as if time itself exhaled. She walked straight to the metal box beneath the table where their father kept his old case files. Her fingers moved carefully, opening the latch, lifting folders worn from years of handling. She found the watch wrapped in a faded cloth, exactly where Darius said it would be. She held it for a long moment, feeling the familiar weight against her palm. Then she reached deeper, pulling out the files labeled Midwest Imports, the name that had haunted their father's final months. She opened the first folder and saw diagrams, handwritten notes, and photographs marked by the steady handwriting she recognized instantly. Her breath tightened. Their father had tracked every shipment, every officer, every unexplained transfer. He had seen the pattern before anyone else, and he had died before he could finish the work. Camilla closed the folder gently and whispered, "We will finish it for you." As she set the files on the table, Theo Rivera entered through the open cabin door with his backpack slung across his shoulder. Theo had driven separately, taking back roads to avoid attention. He stopped when he saw the files. "Is that all of it?" he asked quietly. Camilla nodded. "This is everything he left behind." Theo placed his backpack down and pulled out his laptop, connecting drives in a practiced rhythm. "I pulled the traffic cam footage," he said, "and the gas station angle too. Crow is on camera the entire time." Camilla leaned closer. "Is it clear?" she asked. Theo nodded again. "Crystal clear. Sunlight hits him directly as he drops the package." Camilla closed her eyes for a moment, picturing her brother pressed against the Jeep, imagining the pain he carried silently. She opened her eyes again and steadied her voice. "Then we have the first pillar." Theo pulled up a series of still frames. "We also have timestamps," he said. "Exact second, exact angle. No one can dispute this." Camilla looked at the screen. The images showed the truth with painful clarity. The sound of tires on gravel made both of them turn. Isabella Quinn stepped inside, calm and composed, carrying a stack of financial documents. "I traced the ledger entries," she said. "Lawson used the shell company exactly as your father suspected. Money moves through 3 dummy accounts. The records match the shipment times." Camilla placed a hand over her chest. "Everything he wrote was correct," she whispered. Isabella nodded, "and he died before he could prove it." Theo looked at Camilla. "We are proving it now," Camilla answered. "Yes, and we must move fast. Lawson threatened me outside the paper yesterday." Isabella's voice held a steady warning. "He is desperate. That makes him reckless." Camilla opened another folder and read through the handwritten notes. Every page carried their father's quiet determination. "He never stopped looking," she said softly. "We cannot stop either." As evening approached, Camilla locked the files into a protective case. She placed the watch inside as well, securing the micro SD card hidden beneath the back plate. "We take this first," she said. "We do not lose it." Theo and Isabella nodded. Theo powered up a small drone resting in his backpack. "I will follow us from above," he said, "just in case." Camilla offered a faint, determined smile. "Good. We will need it." They left the cabin and drove toward the main road. The sun was beginning to lower, but its light still held strong across the open sky. Halfway to the city, Camilla's phone vibrated, a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then answered. "Officer Chen?" a quiet voice said. "We need to talk." Camilla tightened her grip on the wheel. "Why?" she asked. His voice trembled with uncertainty. "I know what Lawson is doing. I want to help." Camilla kept her tone steady. "If that were true, you would not be calling now." Chen swallowed audibly. "I have information you need." Camilla paused. "If you want to talk, meet me at the Elmwood rest area. 2 hours. Chen hesitated. "I will be there." She hung up without another word. Theo leaned forward. "You trust him?" Camilla stared ahead. "No, but I think he is afraid." They arrived at the rest area while the sky still held a faint trace of daylight. Camilla parked carefully, placing the files in the footwell where she could reach them. Theo kept the drone high, capturing every angle. Isabella waited in the back seat, ready to move if needed. 10 minutes later, Chen arrived in a patrol car, stepping out with anxious movements. He approached slowly. "I did not know Lawson was going this far," he said. Camilla studied him. "Then why did you try to steal the drive last week?" His face tightened. "Because Lawson told me you were framing him." Camilla's voice sharpened. "And you believed him?" Chen shook his head. "I did not want to. I am not proud of it." Camilla watched his hands carefully. "Why are you here?" she asked. Chen stepped closer. "Lawson is planning something tonight. He is meeting with someone at the warehouse." Camilla stayed silent. Chen continued. "And he wants you followed." Before he could say more, tires screeched behind them. Chen turned. Panic crossed his face. "He senses someone," he whispered. Theo's drone feed revealed a second patrol vehicle speeding toward them. "Get in the car," Camilla commanded. They dove inside. She accelerated with calm precision. The second vehicle closed in fast. Theo activated the drone and kept it above the chase. Camilla kept her eyes steady on the road. "They are trying to trap us," she said. Theo watched the screen. "Exit ahead," he said. "Take it." Camilla turned sharply, the car fishtailing for a moment before regaining traction. The pursuing car followed, trying to cut them off. Camilla held the wheel with controlled force. "He will not stop us," she said through clenched breath. Theo watched the drone feed. "You have distance," he said. "Take the ramp." Camilla followed his direction. The second car overshot the turn and skidded into the median, losing its path. Camilla accelerated forward, heart pounding but voice steady. "We keep moving," she said. "We have work to finish." When they reached the edge of the city again, Camilla slowed the car and breathed deeply. "Darius trusted us," she said. "Now we must trust ourselves." She placed her hand on the case in the footwell. "Everything we need to expose Lawson begins here." Theo nodded. Isabella met Camilla's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Tonight," she said, "we take the next step." Camilla stared ahead with calm determination. "Yes," she said, "because the truth is already moving, and Lawson will not outrun it." Darius Hale lay on the thin jail mattress with pain moving slowly across his ribs when a guard arrived with an unexpected message from his assigned public defender. A man who had once admired Darius's courtroom skill and now whispered urgently through the narrow slot in the steel door. "Your sister reached the cabin. She found the watch." Darius exhaled with quiet relief because the watch carried the piece of evidence that could never fall into Lawson's hands. Inside its back plate lay a micro SD card containing 3 years of GPS logs from a tracker he had fastened beneath Lawson's take-home Tahoe. That tracker had followed Lawson through every daylight stop at the Midwest Imports warehouse, every unexplained detour, every false seizure, every drop-off after evidence had disappeared from custody. And now, at last, that silent trail of truth had reached the people who could expose it. As the guard stepped away, Darius repeated the plan in his mind, steady and clear, because physical pain could not be allowed to dull purpose. He forced himself to stand. Each breath ached. Each step reminded him of the boots in the shower block, but resolve held him upright. In the visiting room the next morning, he sat across from Theo Rivera, who had arrived with eyes sharp from a night without sleep. Theo pressed his hand lightly to the glass. "We extracted the card," he said. "The logs show 22 trips to Midwest Imports, 3 in broad daylight, all within the same 90-minute time window." Darius nodded once. "That is the pattern my father found before they silenced him." Theo opened a folder and lifted the first printed sheet. "Here," he said. "Every location ping, every timestamp, every radius of movement, no gaps, no missing intervals." Darius studied the page. The data did not lie. Lawson had walked into his own downfall. When Theo stepped away from the glass to breathe, Camilla took his place. Her voice carried both grief and strength. "Dad was right," she said softly. "It was always Midwest Imports." Darius lowered his eyes for a moment, not from doubt, but from a wave of quiet emotion that rose and fell like a tide. "He paid for that truth with his life," Darius said. "Now Lawson will pay for burying it." Camilla pressed her palm to the glass. "You are not alone," she said. "We are moving fast." Darius straightened his posture. "Then you must listen carefully. A man will contact you. Retired Detective Kai Brooks. He is the final piece." Camilla's expression grew tense with concern. "Can we trust him?" she asked. Darius answered with measured certainty. "Yes. His son died from heroin recycled through Lawson's network. He has waited for this chance longer than we have." Camilla nodded slowly. "Then we bring him in." She stood and looked at Darius with a grief softened by determination. "We will finish this," she said. Darius whispered, "Be careful. Lawson will watch every shadow." As Camilla and Theo drove across Detroit, they reached a small diner where Kai Brooks waited in a booth near the back, a man worn by loss, yet standing in full dignity. His hands trembled only once when Camilla placed their father's files on the table. He lifted the first page with a slow, deliberate movement. "Your father was a good man," Brooks said quietly. "He saw things others refused to see." Camilla met his eyes. "And those things killed him." Brooks nodded. "And nearly killed my son." He pulled a small black device from his jacket pocket and set it gently on the table. "This is the wire," he said. "If you want Lawson, this is how you get him." Theo leaned closer. "Will he take the bait?" he asked. Brooks breathed deeply, gathering courage shaped by grief. "He will," he answered. "He trusts me. He thinks I still bury files for him." Camilla's voice carried a solemn warning. "He will turn on you the moment he senses doubt." Brooks smiled sadly. "I have nothing left to lose." He lifted the wire again. "Give me the time and the place." Theo opened his laptop and pulled up the GPS analysis. "Tonight," he said. "He returns to the warehouse. Same window. Same routine." Brooks placed the wire inside his jacket. "Then I will be there," he said. As dusk approached, Brooks drove slowly to the Midwest Imports warehouse, rehearsing his story with each passing mile. His hands shook only once as he touched the empty passenger seat where his son used to sit. When he reached the building, he parked near the rear lot and waited. Soon, Lawson's Tahoe pulled in, its headlights cutting through the lingering daylight. Lawson stepped out with the sharp confidence of a man who believed time still obeyed him. Brooks greeted him with a measured voice. "Shipment arrived early," he said. Lawson nodded, eyes scanning the area. "Then let us finish this," he replied. Every word, every breath, every footstep echoed through the wire beneath Brooks's jacket. He led Lawson inside the warehouse where stacked wooden crates lined the walls. Lawson lifted a crowbar with steady precision. $3 million, he said, "and worth every cent." Brooks watched him break open the crate. He forced himself to stand still as Lawson counted the cash with slow satisfaction. "You know," Lawson said, "people believe this city survives on justice, but it survives on control." Brooks responded quietly. "And on those who know when to stay silent." Lawson gave a dark laugh. "And you, Kai, have always known." Brooks lowered his gaze. "Yes," he said. "I have always known." Across the city, Darius sat on his cell bunk with a calm exterior masking deep internal urgency. He knew Brooks was wearing the wire. He knew the audio would reach the FBI within hours. And he knew Lawson, who believed the world bent to his will, had finally placed himself inside the circle of truth. Darius breathed slowly. With each breath, he felt the distance between pain and purpose narrowing. At midnight, Theo, Isabella, and Camila gathered in a quiet room above a closed storefront, listening through a live channel connected to the wire. The audio crackled. Lawson's voice rose with unsettling confidence. "This city needs men who understand power," he said. "Men like us." Brooks answered with careful restraint. "And men who can keep the wheels turning," Lawson continued. "As long as we control the flow, no one can stop us." His footsteps moved across the concrete floor. Not the courts, not the press, not the dead. Camila's breath caught at that final word. She pressed her hand to her chest, steadying herself. "That is it," she whispered. Theo nodded. "This is everything." Isabella folded her arms tightly. "It is more than enough." When the recording ended, Brooks stepped out of the warehouse with a steady stride, knowing the weight of his actions. Lawson followed him with no suspicion, no awareness that the ground beneath him had finally broken. As they parted ways, Brooks whispered a quiet apology meant only for his son. Camila placed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the moment. Theo closed his laptop. "It is time," he said quietly. The truth is no longer hidden. And as dawn approached, Darius lay awake in Division 9, bruised and aching, but with the calm certainty of a man who felt the first real shift in years. Somewhere beyond the concrete walls, sunlight waited to rise again, carrying the promise that Lawson's last day of freedom had already begun. Judge Donovan Briggs set the tone of the hearing the moment he entered the courtroom, walking with the self-assured calm of a man who believed his decisions would never be questioned. And when he looked down at Darius Hale standing before him in a jail uniform that hid the bruises beneath it, he gave a tight, dismissive nod and said, "Bail is set at $800,000, as if the amount were nothing more than a small inconvenience. The words struck Camila like a blow. She sat behind the railing with Isabella and Theo, her hands pressed together to stop their trembling. Darius stood tall, though each breath stirred the ache in his ribs. He answered with quiet dignity, "Your Honor, the timeline," but Briggs cut him short, speaking with a sharpness meant to silence. "We will not delay," he said. "Trial begins Monday." Camila's heart pounded. Monday was 8 days away. 8 days for Lawson to move, to act, to silence, to bury evidence, to destroy witnesses. 8 days was nothing. It was a weapon disguised as a schedule. The clerk announced the next case. The bailiff stepped forward, and Darius was led away with slow, careful steps. Camila rose instantly, her voice soft but firm as she whispered to herself, "We will not let this happen." Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun cast long lines across the steps as Camila walked toward her car, her mind racing through every file, every piece of evidence, every move they needed to make before Monday. She barely had time to unlock her door before a shadow shifted beside her. Captain Trent Lawson stepped out from behind a pillar with a calculated, controlled stride. His face carried a confident look that tried to mimic calm, but beneath it lived a tension sharpened by fear. He stopped inches from her. The gold on his badge glinted in the sunlight. He spoke with a measured cruelty. "Tell your brother to take the plea," he said, "or he will not make it to trial." Camila held her ground. She did not step back. She did not show fear. Her voice remained steady and formal, her eyes fixed on his. "You forgot something," she said. "This city has cameras now. Everywhere." Lawson let the words sit in the air. His jaw tightened. Then he forced a cold smile. "You do not understand what you are stepping into," Camila answered. "Yes, Captain, I do." Her voice carried a weight he did not expect. His eyes narrowed. He turned away and walked back to his unmarked cruiser, the tension in his shoulders betraying the calm he tried to project. When Camila watched the car pull away, she placed a hand over her chest and whispered, "He is afraid. That means we are close." Back at the small room above the closed storefront, Theo paced the floor with a laptop balanced on his arm, pulling together files, photos, timestamps, and mapping data. "We must anticipate everything he will do," he said. Isabella organized financial documents with precision. "We must also anticipate what he will destroy." Camila remained in the center of the room, silent, focused, assembling the pieces in her mind. "He wants us to panic," she said. "We will not." Theo looked up sharply. "The judge is helping him," he said. Camila nodded once. "That is why we work faster." Isabella closed a file and said quietly, "We have enough to expose the shell accounts, but we need the wire. We need Kai." At that same moment, miles away, Kai Brooks sat alone in his car, listening to the quiet hum of the engine as he prepared for the second phase of the operation. The gravity of what he had recorded weighed heavily on him. He touched the wire beneath his jacket and whispered his son's name, finding strength in memories that still carried pain. He knew Lawson trusted him. He also knew that trust would be the reason Lawson fell. The next morning, Darius was moved to solitary confinement for his safety, but the guard's expressions revealed the truth. Solitary was where men disappeared before trial. The cell was dim and narrow, but Darius refused to let the darkness settle into him. He stood with slow care, ignoring the ache in his ribs, and repeated the plan in a quiet whisper only he could hear. The wire, the logs, the footage. Each word anchored him. Hours later, as he sat on the metal bunk, a young guard approached the cell and spoke through the bars in a low voice. "2 men died in here last year," he said, "both before court." He stepped away before Darius could answer. Darius breathed slowly. Fear did not fill him. Purpose did. He whispered to himself, "I will not break." Meanwhile, the city moved with a restless pulse. At the Free Press building, Camila reviewed drafts of a story she could not yet publish. She held the printed pages tightly. "When this is over," she whispered, "his name will be known." In a quiet office, Isabella reviewed evidence logs and matching bank statements. "We must keep everything secure," she said. "No gaps, no doubts." Theo studied the GPS data repeatedly, noting each route Lawson took, each unexplained stop, each overlap with known shipment times. "He made the same mistake every month," Theo said. "He trusted routine." Camila stepped to the window, and routine exposed him. That night, as the final pieces came together, the team prepared for the hearing. They knew Lawson had tried to rig. Briggs had refused motions for delay. He had refused evidentiary challenges. He had refused requests for independent review. The trial was designed to move fast, too fast, far beyond the normal pace of justice. The next morning, Camila arrived at the courthouse early, carrying the protective case that held their father's files, the watch, and the new evidence they had gathered. She knew Lawson would be watching. She knew he would attempt something. She held her head high and walked with steady purpose. Inside the courtroom, Darius entered with slow, deliberate steps. His face carried the marks of Division 9, yet his posture remained firm. Lawson sat behind the prosecution table, his eyes trained on Darius, with a look that tried to mask unease. Briggs took the bench and began the session with a tone too smooth for a case so severe. But before he could proceed, a court officer stepped forward with a sealed note. Briggs opened it, read it, and his face tightened ever so slightly. He cleared his throat. "This hearing is continued until further notice." Gasps moved through the gallery. Lawson stood abruptly. "What is this?" he demanded. Briggs did not answer him. The bailiff called for order. The judge rose and exited the courtroom quickly. Camilla looked at Theo and Isabella. "The wire reached them," she whispered. In that moment, Darius understood the shift. Lawson felt it too. His eyes carried a sudden flicker of fear he could not hide. He stepped back from the table, breathing heavier, as if the ground beneath him had begun to tilt. And as Darius was escorted out of the courtroom, he felt something he had not felt since the day Lawson framed his father. Momentum. Quiet. Steady. Irreversible. Friday night settled over Detroit with an uneasy stillness, the kind that arrives before decisive action. And as the clock moved toward midnight, retired Detective Kai Brooks sat alone in his car near the Midwest Imports warehouse, steadying his breath while his fingers rested on the wire beneath his jacket. Knowing this recording would either expose everything or become the last act of a life shaped by loss, he whispered his son's name once, as if offering a quiet promise, then stepped out of the car and walked toward the dimly lit entrance where he had met Captain Trent Lawson dozens of times before. Lawson arrived minutes later, stepping out of his Tahoe with the confidence of a man who believed power still obeyed him. And when he approached Brooks, he carried a hardened smile, unaware that every word he would speak in the next hours would seal his fate. "You have the package?" Lawson asked, his tone sharp but calm. Brooks nodded. "Inside," he replied, and together they entered the warehouse where wooden crates lined the floor. Lawson pried open the first crate, revealing sealed bags stacked in tight rows. "$3 million, he said. "We keep this flowing and no one touches us." Brooks kept his voice even. "You built a strong system." Lawson adjusted his gloves. "I built a system this city depends on." Every syllable vibrated through the small wire transmitter, sending the truth toward the agents listening across the city. Outside, far from this warehouse, Camilla, Theo, and Isabella sat in a small room above the shuttered storefront. Headphones pressed tight against their ears as they listened to Lawson boast about shipments, payouts, and control. Theo's hand trembled with restrained emotion. "This is everything," he whispered. Isabella nodded slowly, her voice steady. "Every line links to the accounts." Camilla placed her hand over her heart as Lawson continued to speak, his words dripping with a confidence that revealed the full reach of his corruption. "Judges, prosecutors, officers, they follow my lead," Lawson said. "No one challenges me. They know better," Camilla whispered. "Not anymore." The recording captured another detail, a chilling one, as Lawson added quietly, "Even the ones we lost along the way, they stayed silent." Brooks swallowed, feeling the weight of his son's memory press against him, but he held steady. The recording would end Lawson. When dawn approached, the first thin line of light slid through the warehouse skylight. Lawson closed the crate and said, "Let us settle the cash." It was the moment the FBI had been waiting for. A voice crackled through Brooks' earpiece. "Move now." What followed unfolded with the unbroken precision of a long-planned strike. The warehouse doors burst open, agents flooding the floor in coordinated formation. Lawson froze. His hand drifted toward his holster, but the agents were already upon him. "Drop your weapon," they commanded as beams of light converged. Lawson lifted his gun toward his chin in a frantic attempt to take the one escape he believed he controlled. The shot fired too late. The bullet tore through his jaw. He collapsed backward, choking on his own breath as his body hit the concrete. Agents rushed forward, securing him with pressure and restraints, shouting for medics. Brooks stepped aside and leaned against a crate, his breath shaking as the realization settled in. The man who had taken his son's life would finally face justice. But the morning was far from over. At Wayne County Jail, in the sunlit transfer corridor where Darius was scheduled to be moved before dawn, Sergeant Elias Crow and two other officers wheeled in a metal medical cart with calculated efficiency. Darius stood at the far end of the corridor, his ribs aching, his shoulders stiff, his wrists still bruised, but his mind alert. Crow approached him slowly, carrying a syringe in one hand and a set of forged medical papers in the other. "You will feel nothing," Crow said quietly. "Quick, clean." Darius held his gaze, his voice calm. "This is the last thing you will ever do for Lawson." Crow frowned. "You talk too much." He stepped closer, raising the syringe. But before he could take another step, the corridor burst into thunderous motion. Boots hammered the floor. Agents shouted commands. The air shook with the force of a coordinated entry. Detective Sophia Quinn led the charge, her badge raised high as she stepped between Darius and Crow. "Federal agents," she called out. "Stand down." Officers behind Crow stumbled backward, shock breaking across their faces. The syringe clattered to the floor, rolling toward a wall. Crow tried to reach for his weapon, but Quinn was faster. She forced him against the wall with a swift, controlled motion, securing his wrists with cuffs as he cursed under his breath. Two other agents swept Darius behind them, shielding him as more officers were subdued. Lawson, bloodied from the warehouse raid, was wheeled into the corridor seconds later, strapped to a gurney, his jaw wrapped in emergency bandages, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. Quinn leaned close, speaking with formal clarity. "Captain Trent Lawson, you are under arrest for narcotics trafficking, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and attempted murder." Lawson tried to speak, but only a muffled, broken sound escaped through blood-stained bandages. Darius stepped forward. Though agents tried to steady him, his ribs ached, but he held himself with dignity. He looked into Lawson's eyes, seeing the man who had destroyed lives, buried evidence, and orchestrated his father's death. His voice remained steady, controlled. "My father saw the monster in you 10 years ago," he said. "Now the whole world sees it." Lawson blinked slowly, fear rising in his eyes for the first time. The corridor fell silent except for the soft hum of medical equipment. Agents escorted Crow and the others away. Lawson's gurney was rolled toward the exit, surrounded by armed guards as sunlight poured through the small corridor windows. Darius closed his eyes briefly and breathed through the pain, knowing the tide had turned. The network Lawson spent years constructing had collapsed in one decisive morning. The wire, the shipment, the attempted murder. Every piece had aligned. Camila, Theo, Isabella, and Brooks had each risked their lives for this moment. Darius whispered softly, "It is over." But even as he said it, he knew the aftermath would take months, perhaps years, to settle. He stood tall as Quinn approached him. "You are safe now," she said. Darius nodded. "No," he replied. "Not yet. But we are close." And as the federal convoy moved out of the jail, carrying Lawson and his men into custody, the first true calm in years settled across Darius's heart. Lawson had fallen. The darkness he built had finally cracked under the weight of the truth. And in the bright light of that morning, the justice long denied had finally begun to take shape. Trent Lawson survived the raid and the prison corridor, but he survived only as a fractured shadow of the man who once controlled a precinct with absolute certainty. And in the months that followed, the consequences of his own violence closed in with a steady, unbreakable force. He lay in a hospital bed first, jaw wired, throat stitched, hands bound to rails, unable to speak, unable to command, unable to hide. While federal agents lined the doorway, reading charge after charge with calm, formal voices that stripped away the last remnants of his authority. When he was transported to federal court 6 weeks later, he listened through a speaker strapped to his throat as the indictment was read. Conspiracy, narcotics trafficking, obstruction, attempted murder, civil rights violations, racketeering, The judge sentenced him to life without parole. And Lawson blinked hard, but said nothing, because the bandages, wires, and his own broken body prevented him from forming words. 18 months later, long after the trial had ended, he was attacked in a prison hallway by 2 men he once framed, and the assault left him in a permanent vegetative state. His wife filed for divorce the next day. His son changed his last name within the month. The man who had once walked the streets with manufactured glory now lay motionless in a dark room, forgotten except by those who remembered the pain he caused. And yet, while Lawson faded into silence, the world outside began to heal in small, deliberate ways. Judge Briggs resigned hours before his impeachment hearing, packing his chambers in a hurried quiet that betrayed his fear. District Attorney Elias Patel faced a disciplinary board that disbarred him for life, his name removed from the rolls with a final stroke of a pen. Sergeant Crow and the officers who assisted him were convicted on multiple counts. Lieutenant Powell of Internal Affairs entered a guilty plea in exchange for testimony that shocked even seasoned prosecutors. Officer Chen, who had stood in 2 worlds, cooperated fully and received a drastically reduced sentence. The system that had protected Lawson for years collapsed with the weight of its own hidden truth. Darius Hale spent the months after the raid recovering with slow, disciplined effort. Each breath remained painful for weeks. His ribs healed unevenly. The memory of the attacks lingered each time he moved too quickly. Yet he worked each day with quiet purpose, because the freedom he had regained came with responsibility. When his name was cleared, the county issued a formal apology. He did not attend the press conference. He preferred silence. When he stepped out of Wayne County Jail for the last time, he carried no bitterness, only a sense of solemn duty. Camilla stood waiting for him beside a plain sedan, her eyes filled with pride, relief, and the exhaustion of a long battle finally ending. "You are free," she whispered as he walked toward her. Darius answered softly. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of the truth." Their embrace held for a long moment. The cold air carried a stillness that felt sacred. The city had changed while Darius waited behind concrete walls. And now he walked into a Detroit beginning to heal. The plan for the Marcus Hale Justice Center began quietly in Camila's living room, with files spread across a table and names listed carefully in neat columns. Jamal Cruz, freed after new evidence invalidated his conviction, arrived with a calm dignity shaped by years unjustly taken from him. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet weight of someone who understood suffering and hope in equal measure. "We can help people," he said. "We can give them the thing no one gave us." Darius looked at him and nodded. "Then you will lead the program," he said. Jamal lowered his eyes, overwhelmed by the trust placed in him. "I will," he said, "for every man still waiting in there." Within a year, the old Precinct 9 building was transformed into a center dedicated to reviewing wrongful convictions, aiding returning citizens, and offering legal support to those who had no voice. The dedication ceremony drew a modest crowd, the kind that valued substance over spectacle. Darius stood at the podium, speaking with measured calm. "We named this center after our father," he said, "because he believed justice must never bend to comfort or convenience." Camilla stood beside him, steady, strong, her hand resting lightly on the podium. The applause was gentle, but full of respect. Camilla's work at the Free Press earned national attention. Her investigative series on the Lawson Network exposed layers of corruption that stretched across courts, law enforcement, and city politics. The Pulitzer Committee recognized her with its highest honor. When she stood on the stage to accept the award, she spoke clearly. "This story belongs to my brother," she said, "and to every family who kept fighting, even when the truth was buried." Isabella Quinn and Theo Rivera became central figures in statewide justice reform efforts, using data and financial analysis to strengthen oversight programs. Kai Brooks, though visibly older and carrying the grief that never left him, attended the Justice Center opening. He stood quietly in the back, observing the space built on the ashes of a past he had helped expose. He whispered to Darius, "Your father would be proud." Darius nodded. "So would your son." Brooks closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment of peace. 2 years after Lawson's fall, Darius stood for election to the Detroit City Council. His campaign was simple, focused, honest. No theatrics, no empty promises, just a clear vision for justice reforms and community rebuilding. The voters responded with overwhelming support. On election night, as results came in, Camila placed a hand on his arm and whispered, "You earned this." Darius answered softly, "We earned it." And when he was sworn in months later, his first words were a quiet dedication to those whose names had been lost in court records and sealed files. Snow fell lightly the morning Darius drove to visit his father's grave. The cemetery stood quiet, the air crisp. He walked with slow, steady steps, carrying a small cloth to clean the new engraving on the headstone. Detective Marcus Hale died in the line of duty. He brushed away a thin layer of frost. Then he placed his hand against the stone, allowing silence to settle between them. "We finished it, Dad," he whispered. The words came gently, with a warmth that rose through the cold air. As he stood there, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number appeared. "I need help. Flint, please." Darius looked at the screen for a long moment. Then he slipped the phone back into his coat pocket, keeping his hand on the headstone for one more breath. "The work continues," he whispered, "and we will be ready." Snow fell softly around him, and the quiet strength of the moment carried him forward into the next fight under the same winter sun that had watched every step of the journey. Thank you for watching this story. If it moved you, please take a moment to subscribe, give the video a like, and share it with someone who cares about justice. Your support helps these voices reach further.